Today on a special edition of Heart of the Matter.
Why not come and learn about history?
It's time for a conversation about a lasting legacy.
And I'm proud to have been a Negro League ball player.
The people who paved the way for change and the ongoing effort to preserve the past.
And if you haven't been to the Negro Leagues Museum, to me, you're not a baseball fan.
Baseball's just part of this lesson.
Is merely a premise for a far more grandiose story.
Today, we explore the impact made by the Negro Leagues, Kansas City's contributions, and the mission to give fans a front row seat to history at home.
From KMBC 9, Kansas City, this is Heart of the Matter.
Thanks for joining us. I'm Cody Holyoke. Baseball is widely considered America's pastime, a sport accessible to anyone. But it wasn't always like that. Racism and Jim Crow laws kept black players off the rosters for years, until a pivotal meeting in Kansas City more than a century ago. Owners gathered at the old Paseo YMCA to organize the Negro National League, paving the way for talented black players and for an economic boom across much of the country. And that's just part of what you can learn at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. Today, we'll have an important conversation with Museum President Bob Kendrick about the museum's mission and the lessons still being taught today. Thanks for having us. We look at these amazing artifacts, this collection. This took years to accrue and to cultivate. How do you get these pieces here to Kansas City?
Well, early on, we were very fortunate. I'd say 95% of the items that you see on display here at the museum were donated by the players, former players, and or their families. It has really only been over the last decade that we've started to actively try to compete to bring memorabilia home to the museum. I guess you could say, in many ways, we've become our own worst enemy. The more we're popularizing the story, we're driving up the price of these rare artifacts that make it difficult for us to go out in the marketplace and compete with all these private collectors. Most of this stuff is in the hands of private collectors these days.
How many pieces are here?
Oh, we're fortunate. We have a number of them. The collection continues to grow. I do believe that when we build a new facility and all the excitement and energy around a brand new Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, that a call for memorabilia will be going out. And I suspect that we'll get a pretty good response back to that call. But for us, it's always been the story that drove this museum. The artifacts help bring the story to life. And so there are no insignificant artifacts as we see it. Every piece is vitally important because there's a new story to be told around those pieces.
Didn't start out like this.
No.
You have much more humble beginnings.
Oh, very much humble beginning. We talk about a little one-room office in 1990 where guys like Buck O'Neill and other local Negro Leaguers who were still with us at that time, sad to say they've all passed on, man, they literally took turns paying the monthly rent to keep that little office open. And as I like to say, with it, our hopes and dreams of one day building a facility that would indeed pay rightful tribute to not just one of the greatest chapters in baseball history, but one of the greatest chapters in American history.
And we talk about this. All of this work really is an entry point to a much wider, deeper conversation.
Absolutely. Baseball is merely a premise for a far more grandiose story. So yeah, the story of the Negro Leagues is much bigger than the game of baseball. Yet it's still just a tiny part of the game of baseball. But for me, when our visitors come here, I hope they understand that there are really three key themes that drive this story. Number one, the importance of economic empowerment. Wherever you had successful black baseball, you typically had thriving black economies. And when we lost the Negro Leagues, we lost that catalyst that sparked economic development in so many urban communities across this country. Number two, an unprecedented level of leadership that emerged through the formation of the Negro Leagues as all these great business minds were being immersed in our community. Number three, the social advancement of this country, as Jackie Robinson is handpicked from the great Kansas City Monarchs to be the chosen one, which is why I say that the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum is one of this nation's preeminent civil rights, social justice institutions. It's just seen through the lens of baseball. But more importantly, it is triumph over that adversity.
Right. American history, civil rights history,
Yes.
black history.
All rolled into one incredible story around these courageous athletes who, when it's all said and done, they just wanted to play ball. They had no idea they were doing any of these things that you and I are talking about right now. They just wanted to play ball.
How do you broach that conversation about tolerance, acceptance, at a time where our country feels like there's a deep divide going on?
Well, I think it magnifies why the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum is so important. Because here, through the lens of baseball, we're able to teach. And so it's not as standoffish maybe in the eyes and minds of some folks because it's still a baseball story. These other elements are rooted very deeply in this story. So we kind of hook you through the baseball story. Because yes, if you're wondering if you're going to meet great baseball players when you come here, yes you are. You're going to meet some of the greatest athletes to ever put on a baseball uniform. But really, by the time that our guests walk away from this experience, they walk away cheering the power of the human spirit to persevere and prevail. So there are lessons to be learned, not from necessarily the adversity that they faced, but rather what they did to overcome the adversity. That's where the triumph comes from. And through the lens of these athletes, I do believe that we are planting the seed for why diversity, equity, and inclusion are to be so valued, and how they are indeed pillars toward building a bridge for tolerance and respect. And really that's where we're trying to grow as a society, and we think we have a mechanism here in this great museum that is leading that effort.
What's the most widespread reaction to somebody who's never stepped foot in here before, they come in here for the first time?
I didn't know that. That's it. It is a common thread amongst our visitors because for the more majority of them, it is an awakening. And as my late mother would say, you don't know what you don't know. And it's important that you have these cultural institutions like the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum to bridge the gap that is there in the pages of American history books.
That is a mission that's really taking off, especially with younger generations. We're back next to explore the popularity of the Negro Leagues now and what that means moving forward. And we'll look at plans to create more space for learning and bring more development to 18th and Vine as our Heart of the Matter conversation rolls on.
Winner of the Kansas Association of Broadcasters Award for Best Recurring Program. You're watching Heart of the Matter on KMBC 9.
Games like the Buck O'Neil Classic are quickly becoming something of a tradition. College athletes wear uniforms in the style of Negro Leagues teams like the Kansas City Monarchs, one sign of the growing appreciation for their contributions to the game. That's not counting video games or animated series now picking up steam. These are things Negro Leagues Museum President Bob Kendrick could only dream of 30 years ago. You started here decades ago as a volunteer, right? What sparked that interest in the Negro Leagues in you?
I was working for the Kansas City Star at that time, and I was senior copywriter in the Star's promotions department, which functioned as its in-house advertising agency. And so I drew the assignment of promoting the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum's first ever traveling exhibition. So I said, I better go down and go see this museum so I can do a little bit of research to prep to put the promotional campaign together. I pull up in front of the Lincoln Building, and I go up to the third floor of the Lincoln Building, and I'm looking for this Negro Leagues Baseball Museum's office, and the late, great Don Motley, who was the longtime executive director of the museum. I peek my head in, and I said, I'm looking for the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, and he looks up at me and he says, son, you're standing in it. I literally walked into what would become my passion. I fell in love with the story. And I fell in love with the incredible athletes who made this story. And I considered myself to be a baseball fan. And I quickly realized I didn't know a doggone thing about this game as it related to the history of this country. And I guess you could say that I became somewhat engrossed in it. I wanted to learn as much as I could, and I didn't want to keep it to myself. I wanted everybody else to feel the same way that I felt about it. And then I started to meet the players, and of course one particular player by the name of John Jordan Buck O'Neal. And I was no different than anyone who had an encounter with Buck. It was love at first sight. And you just wanted to be on Buck's team, the passion, the charisma that he had for wanting their story to be told. And I remember early on, I asked him, I said, well, Buck, what motivated you to want to build a Negro Leagues Baseball Museum? And his answer was succinct, but very poignant, so that we would be remembered. And that has been the quest, and that became something that fueled me, was to try and help this organization make sure that those unsung heroes of the Negro Leagues were never forgotten.
That quest has grown by leaps and bounds over the last 30 years. I mean, you have video games now. Looking back, would you even imagine that you'd be where you are today?
We had hoped. I don't know if we had really fully imagined the explosive growth of this organization and the heightened interest that this organization has triggered. Negro Leagues Baseball history right now is as popular and as hot as it's ever been, with the video game and the animated series, these kinds of things that are really grabbing the imaginations of a lot of young folks.
I was going to say, this is reaching a new generation too. How important is that?
Oh, it's extremely important. I've always believed that for a museum, particularly a history museum, and even more so a cultural institution like the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, you have to establish relevancy. You see, our kids are too savvy. They are quick to say, that was then, this is now. And I have to find ways to show them how now applies to them. And so whether it's the animated series that we released last year in partnership with Major League Baseball, the first ever animated series done on the Negro Leagues, first ever animated series done by Major League Baseball, and they chose to do it with the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. The series is called Undeniable, 3 animated shorts that highlight certain aspects of the Negro Leagues, the women of the Negro Leagues, the relationship between Jackie Robinson and Monty Irvin, and why Jackie was the chosen one to break the color barrier in baseball, and the international impact of the Negro Leagues. See, our game is a global game today, and it's due in large part to the Negro Leagues. They just never got credited for it.
I know you also had the free February promotions that you've been doing for a few years now.
Yeah, thanks to the Royals and the Royals Foundation, absolutely.
Do you start to feel a little tight when you have 14,000 people coming in a month?
That's when you realize that you need a bigger space, because the museum, and it's so intimate, you can feel their spirits in this space. But when you get 14,000+ people in it, it was never set up to handle that many people at one time. Now, to the credit of all of those who came in here for free February, no one complained. They maneuvered their way around, and I hope it didn't detract from their experience. But I'll go back to last summer, when former NFL running back Marshawn Lynch was in town, and he brought Patrick Mahomes Sr. over, and they were shooting a piece for Thursday Night Football, that a regular series that he does called In Your City. And when he walked through the turnstiles of this museum and peered in to this field where we're sitting, and now this is a football player, and he looked at me and he says, I feel something. Yeah, because you do feel their spirits. And that will be the challenge, even as we look at a new place. How do we keep the intimacy and the spirit that you feel here in a more larger space? Because sometimes, you know, as you get the expanded space, you lose some of that, and we want to make sure that we do this right. But yeah, now when you get 14,000 people coming through it during a single month, and I think this year it might have been like 16,000 when it was all said and done. We saw it increase over last year. Yeah, it can get a little tight in some areas here. So it absolutely kind of quantifies why we do need a new home.
Our Heart of the Matter conversation continues next with a look at future plans to celebrate the past. Part of teaching the past means looking toward the future. And there's quite a bit in store for the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. Museum President Bob Kendrick takes me back to where it all started.
This is where you want the new museum to be,
Yes.
and it's a full circle moment because of all the history right here.
Yeah, it's kind of poetic that in many ways we will go full circle right back to the very building that gave birth to the story that we're now charged with preserving. As you well know, the Negro Leagues were established inside the former Paseo YMCA. We are now working to convert it into the Buck O'Neill Education and Research Center, and then the new facility will be built adjacent to the historic landmark where it all began, creating what I call the nation's first Negro Leagues campus as the gateway in to historic 18th and Vine, and also creating an international headquarters for both black baseball and social history.
And still working to get the funds to build this. I mean, it's a big complex.
It is a big project. It is a daunting project that's still ahead of us because we're going to have to raise some $25–30 million. But now is the time. We've outgrown our current home. Negro Leagues history is as hot as it has ever been, and this is the perfect time for us to grow this institution and create the next exciting, dynamic phase of growth for the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum and continue to help build on the energy that is now 18th and Vine. We are so thrilled to see the growth of this area. People are living, working, and playing at 18th and Vine again, and the spirit of the Negro Leagues helped drive that.
Let's talk about the growth of this area. You were an ardent supporter, even on the committee, to pass the sales tax renewal for the Chiefs and the Royals in April.
Yes.
That didn't happen. What would you like to see for this neighborhood now?
Well, naturally, I, like all of us who were involved in trying to help push this agenda across the finish line, we were all greatly disappointed. That was the will of the people. Their will spoke loud and clear. I am still hopeful that there is still yet another opportunity to go back to the drawing board, because I do think a downtown ballpark would be tremendous for our city. Naturally, it would be great for the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, and it would be transformative for Kansas City's east side, where the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum operates. And so I am hopeful, I remain optimistic that there may be another opportunity to explore where a new downtown stadium can be, that hopefully those in Kansas City and Jackson County will embrace in a greater fashion. So, but if not, we will just deal with the hand that we're dealt and continue to try to do the great things that we're doing to help bring energy to this, what I think is the most significant historical location in Kansas City. That's historic 18th and Vine.
Big proponent of growing not just 18th and Vine, but the surrounding areas.
Absolutely, and I think that's the opportunity in many ways that was missed. This was going to be tremendous for Jackson County overall, and it was going to keep Kansas City on that thrust of growth that we're experiencing. Our city is red hot now. The energy is at a level that many of us have never seen before, with all the great things that are happening in our city. New airport, new soccer, women's soccer stadium, back-to-back Super Bowl titles, all this stuff, World Cup coming. We want to keep that momentum going.
Next, one last question about the legacy Bob Kendrick wants to leave behind. We're back with one final question for Negro Leagues Museum President Bob Kendrick.
You've always been so busy and so involved building upon the legacy of the Negro Leagues.
Yeah.
What would you like your legacy to be?
You know, I've really never thought about my legacy. I have just been so immersed in taking the baton from Buck O'Neill and just trying to carry on what he had started. Now, I'm self-motivated, always have been, but I would absolutely be lying if I said I wasn't motivated by not wanting to disappoint Buck. And so, I still have time to think about my own legacy, but right now it's about continuing to position this museum for long-term sustainability and growth. And of course, when we build, not if, but when we build this new museum, I think then I'll start to think about legacy, because then you're leaving something that hopefully will stand the test of time. that others will enjoy for generations to come.
Bob Kendrick, thank you.
That is my pleasure.
If you've never been, you should go check out the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum at 18th and Vine. It is an amazing resource right here in our backyard. Learn more online at nlbm.com. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Cody Holyoke. We'll get to the heart of another matter when we see each other again. Have a great day.